Today we tell a story of spiritualism, greed, fraud, death, but more greed. How's that for an introduction, huh? Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilly, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia. Now, if you haven't done so already, I urge you very strongly to go down below, click that subscribe button, then go right next to it and ding the bell so you get notified every time we have a new story out. And if you don't mind, give us a thumbs up too, okay?
Well, you just summed up about everything about American politics, world religion, everything in that world, in that one shot of spiritualism, fraud, greed, death, and more greed. You know, hey, we don't have enough book chapters to be able to put all this stuff in, but yeah, that was an introduction, I'd say. Well, and it's got to be something good, I'm sure, as you have dug up, as you always do.
You know, we look for a lot of very interesting stories that you don't find in the history books, but that are nonetheless part of our history. And this is one of them, one of the strangest ones we've kind of picked out in a long time. So are you ready to get into this?
I think so. And, you know, this kind of reminds me, you just said something right there about, one of the strange things we just kind of dig up there. It's kind of like these little things I drop on my kids in the classroom when I'm telling them this thing about something that is trivia. And they look at me and they say, why am I ever going to have that? And I said, well, you never know when you're going to be on Jeopardy. And the second thing is you don't know when you're going to have to start a conversation about, you know, something along the lines of, hey, let's talk about some fraud going on in the government. I don't know. I mean, it's just something that these kids can pick up on. I said, they're great conversation pieces, but I'm sure this one's a great conversation piece.
Well, this is certainly not something you're going to get tested on in history class, but hopefully you'll find it to be interesting anyway. Leonard Neumeister was a baker living a rather ordinary life in Kentucky, working in a bread shop for $8 a week. And Leonard's weakness, though, appeared to be women, for he'd been married 3 times by 1897, the last to a spiritualist named Lizzie Bailey of Louisville. And Rod, that year 2 things happened that changed his life.
Well, one, he found out that he just didn't have enough yeast in his life to be able to keep things going in those marriages. I'm joking. Anyway, first, his brother Augustus Neumeister passed away in Mobile, Alabama in 1896. Now, Augustus, or however you want to pronounce it, was a steamboat captain and had accumulated quite a substantial fortune by the time of his death. Being childless, that fortune was inherited by his sister, Amelia Spieth, and his 2 brothers, Charles and Leonard. Now, with that money, Leonard built himself a fine house in Louisville, Kentucky. Then, the second thing happened, didn't it, Steve?
It did. Lizzie passed away, leaving Leonard all alone. Now, you remember we said that the recently deceased Lizzie Neumeister was a spiritualist. Well, Leonard was a big believer in spiritualism, fortune-telling, seances, and speaking with the dead. So much so that he often made major life decisions after consulting those spiritualists. And this he did after his wife died. He met with a psychic named Plymouth Weeks in 1897. And in that reading, Ms. Weeks told Leonard that she'd spoken with his dear departed Lizzie, who informed her that he must marry a fellow psychic named Phoebe Matum, alias Mrs. Baker, and that's how she worded it, post haste, and then give away to her all his property. Now, here's a description of that session as set out in the Cincinnati Enquirer of February 14th, Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1898.
The spirit bride came. She was in the person of Miss Phoebe Matum. One night they met at a seance. An empty box was shown him. Then manifestations of the spirits came before him. The box was opened again. Neumeister beheld before his eyes an oil painting, rich in color, of his 3rd wife, who was Mrs. Bailey, another spiritualistic medium. There were 3 written messages from the dead woman. Neumeister read them and then was told to first marry Miss Matum. Next, he should turn over all of his property to her, and then he should take into his house a man whose name was written W.F. Nye. Now, Niemeister followed the instructions to the letter, and Mrs. Matum became Mrs. Niemeister. The county court records at Louisville show where he transferred all of his property to her, and Niemeister also took Nye into his household.
Now, that W.F. Nye, by the way, was Fred Nye, who the spirits insisted come with Phoebe to live with her new husband. This arrangement, though, met with opposition from the Niemeister family, namely his sister Amelia, didn't it, Rod?
Yes, it did, Steve, because she became increasingly concerned over her brother's mental health, like I have been right now during this whole story while we've been reading it, because I've just been questioning his mental health going on, and especially a woman's name named Phoebe Matum. It sounds like ultimatum is what it sounds like in a way, but she even went as far as to file a petition to have him found insane so as to reverse the transfer of the house and other property to Phoebe. Now, she also alleged that Fred Nye was in the household to keep Leonard under his control. Now, when the other members of the family had expressed their concern over Leonard's well-being, Nye told them that he had invested in an orange grove in Florida for their brother and had sold him a patent for a bicycle, bikes being all the craze in the 1890s. She also persuaded the Kentucky Commonwealth Attorney to indict Mrs. Niemeister, Fred Nye, and Plymouth Weeks on charges of obtaining Leonard's property under false pretenses. That was just to name a few, though, wasn't it, Steve?
Well, it was, but, by the time Mrs. Spythe had filed her petition, good old Leonard had disappeared, nowhere to be found. Apparently, Fred Nye and Phoebe had persuaded Leonard to move to that quote-unquote orange grove in Florida since they next appeared in Altoona, Florida, north of Orlando in Lake County. There the three lived until September 17, 1899. And on that day, Phoebe Niemeister notified her neighbors that her husband had disappeared, leaving behind a suicide note in which he wrote that he was going to drown himself in one of the many lakes that surrounded their Florida home. Well, the neighbors, rightly concerned, went to the nearest lake and began to search for Leonard. They found him, already dead, in the waters of the lake.
Well, several of the neighbors, though, had suspicions about Leonard Niemeister's death. They had been shown the note by Phoebe, and, they didn't think that he had written it, for it didn't quite look like his handwriting. So an investigation was conducted by the local authorities, who had their doubts also, and soon both Phoebe Niemeister and Fred Nye were arrested and charged with murder in the death of Leonard Niemeister. They were put in the Lake County Jail, held without bond. After a trial, the jury found the pair not guilty of the murder of Leonard Niemeister. But that's not the end of our story, Steve.
No, it's not. On June 27, 1900, Leonard's brother Charles and the aforementioned Amelia, the one who tried to have Leonard found insane, filed suit against Phoebe Niemeister and Fred Nye, alleging fraud and conspiracy and asking that the transfer of the house be set aside and returned to them as their brother's rightful heirs. They also alleged that Nye was some sort of Svengali who had power over not just their brother, but over Phoebe as well, and that he was the secret beneficiary of Leonard's property. The trial was held in December 1900, and Judge Field dismissed the petition, stating that under Kentucky law, the right to void a marriage was a personal right that could only be exercised by one of the spouses and not by a deceased spouse's heirs at law. Additionally, the judge ruled that since Leonard had moved to Florida, this judge had no jurisdiction over the matter in a Kentucky courtroom. And, Rod, what of those criminal charges of obtaining property under false pretenses that had been filed back in 1898?
Well, the Commonwealth Attorney, Charles Ritchie, dismissed them, since the only one who had legally secured any of the property was Phoebe, and since she was married to Leonard, she was shielded from the charge of fraud. Wow. Phoebe and Fred got to keep all, and I mean all, of Leonard's property.
Wow. Yeah, it doesn't sound right. I mean, legally, the judge made the right decision, but
Right.
it wasn't right to Leonard or his family. But then Leonard got himself into this mess by believing in the power of that spiritualist who obviously was trying to get him lined in hook, line, and sinker,
Wow. Right. This just, you hear these stories, you think at times, no, that this couldn't possibly happen. But, think of when you start talking about cults and these different things about supernaturalist sort of things. There are people that are looking for things in life that they can't find, or they can't find the satisfaction. And with this and these answers presented to him, he probably thought, this is what he had found. He had found the right thing finally. And, well, he found out all too late, because it was all over with by that time. He wasn't alive. He didn't have anything, and nobody else had anything except for Phoebe and who.
Wife number 4, and should we call him a boyfriend?
If you want to. Okay. I would pretty much hint it. I would pretty much hint that and just say that in there. So you're right. Wife number 4 and the boyfriend in there who was, still reaching first base, second base, and third base on times that poor old Leonard wasn't doing it. So.
And folks, that's our story this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. You can subscribe to the audio version of the Stories podcast at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, Audible, Good Pods, Radio Public, Stitcher, or on your favorite podcast app. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.